He looked me dead in the eye and offered me a $5,000 settlement, claiming we were completely bankrupt. He had no idea I had already found the $500,000 he secretly wired offshore. Have you ever discovered that the person you trusted most in the world was secretly plotting your downfall? Let me know in the comments how you survived betrayal, and please subscribe to hear my full story. But before the frozen bank accounts and the courtroom battles, there was just a wife who loved her husband, and the most dangerous part of his trap was how beautiful the illusion was. For 5 years, I believed I was living a beautifully ordinary dream. Mark and I had built a life from the ground up, sharing everything from our morning coffee rituals to the hopes we whispered into the dark before falling asleep. I poured every ounce of my energy into our home, supporting his startup while working long hours at my design firm. We shared everything. At least that was the lie I told myself. Our joint bank account was the symbol of our shared trust. Every paycheck, every bonus, every small financial victory went into that account. We called it our forever fund, meant for the house with the wraparound porch and the children we tentatively planned for next year. I never questioned him when he took over the financial management. "You work too hard, Elena," he would say, kissing my forehead. "Let me handle the boring spreadsheets." I trusted him implicitly. Why wouldn't I? He was my partner, my confidant, the man who held my hand when my mother passed away. But lately, a chilling distance had crept between us. His smiles didn't quite reach his eyes, and his late nights at the office became a permanent fixture of our routine. I chalked it up to stress. I bought him his favorite pastries, left encouraging notes in his briefcase, and tried to be the perfect, supportive wife. I didn't know that while I was busy watering the roots of our marriage, Mark was systematically chopping down the tree. The first hint wasn't a mysterious text message or a sudden argument. It was a subtle shift in the air, a sudden lack of transparency, and a locked drawer in his home office. The sanctuary we built was crumbling, and I hadn't noticed the falling bricks. The unraveling began on a mundane Tuesday evening. The house was quiet, save for the hum of the refrigerator and the gentle patter of rain against the living room window. Mark had called to say he would be late again, another critical client dinner that required his immediate attention. I decided to use the quiet hours to organize our tax documents for the upcoming fiscal year. I needed an old tax form, which I thought might be in his home office. I rarely went in there. It was his sanctuary, a room filled with heavy mahogany and the scent of old paper. As I rummaged through the filing cabinet, my hand brushed against a thick, unlabeled manila envelope shoved to the very back of the bottom drawer. Curiosity, innocent at first, urged me to open it. I expected to find old warranties or forgotten blueprints. Instead, my breath hitched as my eyes scanned the crisp, white pages. The bold black letters at the top of the document felt like a physical blow to my chest. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Divorce papers. My hands began to tremble so violently that the papers rattled in the silent room. I read my name. I read his name. I read the cold, sterile language detailing the irreconcilable differences that had supposedly destroyed our union. He had already signed them. The date next to his signature was from 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks. For 14 days, he had slept next to me, eaten the dinners I cooked, and asked about my day, all while carrying the secret that he was about to erase me from his life. I sank to the floor, clutching the papers, a silent scream tearing through my throat. The initial shock morphed into a suffocating, paralyzing numbness. I sat on the cold hardwood floor of Mark's office for hours, the divorce petition resting in my lap like a ticking time bomb. My mind raced through the past year, desperately searching for the exact moment we fractured. Had I been so blind? So consumed by my own career and our domestic routine that I missed the glaring signs of his discontent? As the numbness faded, a sharper, more pragmatic instinct kicked in. If he had drawn up divorce papers 2 weeks ago, what else was he hiding? I dragged myself off the floor, wiping the dried tears from my cheeks. I booted up our shared desktop computer. I needed to see our finances. I needed to know what irreconcilable differences looked like in our bank accounts. I logged into our joint banking portal, expecting to see our comfortable savings, the forever fund we had sacrificed so much to build. The screen loaded, and I blinked, sure my blurred vision was playing tricks on me. Balance? $412.50. I refreshed the page. Once, twice, 3 times. The number remained stubbornly, cruelly the same. Over $80,000. Gone. Decimated. Panic clawed at my chest as I wildly clicked through the transaction history. There it was, a series of massive wire transfers initiated over the last month, all sent to a routing number I didn't recognize, under the vague guise of investment capital. He wasn't just leaving me. He was actively destroying my future. He had siphoned away our shared dreams, leaving me with nothing but loose change and a stack of unsigned divorce papers. He wanted me penniless, broken, and completely at his mercy. The betrayal burned hotter than my tears. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. I carefully returned the manila envelope to the exact spot in the drawer where I had found it. I closed the browser, erased the search history, and retreated to our bedroom, slipping under the covers just minutes before I heard the front door open. Mark's heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway. He climbed into bed and turned his back to me without a word. Lying beside the stranger who was once my entire world, a cold, hard resolve began to crystallize in my chest. He thought I was the naive, trusting wife who would blindly sign whatever he placed in front of her. He thought the shock of the divorce would distract me from the missing money until it was too late. The next morning, I played my part flawlessly. I made his coffee exactly how he liked it. I smiled, a fragile but convincing curve of my lips, and kissed his cheek as he headed out the door. The moment his car pulled out of the driveway, the mask dropped. I needed a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but a legal strategist. I spent the morning making discreet phone calls, eventually securing an afternoon consultation with Eleanor Vance, a woman known in legal circles as meticulous and incredibly thorough. Sitting in her sleek, glass-walled office, I laid out the sparse facts, the hidden papers, the drained joint account, the mysterious wire transfers. Eleanor listened in silence, her pen tapping a rhythmic beat against her notepad. "He's moving liquid assets to starve you out before filing," she said plainly, her voice full of tactical calculation. "It's a classic, cowardly move. But, Elena, we might have something he doesn't." "What do we have?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly despite my best efforts to project strength. I felt entirely powerless, like a pawn in a game I didn't even know I was playing. Eleanor leaned forward, her sharp eyes locking onto mine. "We have the element of surprise. He thinks you're in the dark, but more importantly, we have the prenup you two signed 5 years ago." My heart sank. The prenuptial agreement. Mark had insisted on it before we got married, claiming it was just standard procedure for a startup founder to protect his early investors. I had signed it without a second thought, blinded by love and the absolute certainty that we would never need it. "The prenup protects him," I whispered, the crushing weight of reality settling over me. "It separates his business assets from our personal ones," Eleanor offered a thin, reassuring smile. "It does, but your husband, like many arrogant people who draft these documents, clearly forgot to read the fine print of his own contract." She pulled a thick file from her desk drawer and flipped it open, sliding a highlighted page across the table toward me. "Read Clause 14, subsection B," she instructed. I leaned in, my eyes scanning the dense legal jargon until I hit the highlighted text. The words blurred for a moment before snapping into sharp, life-altering focus. In the event of a dissolution of marriage, should either party be found attempting to fraudulently conceal, transfer, or hide marital assets in anticipation of divorce, the offending party forfeits their right to the equitable division of property. The innocent party shall automatically be awarded 100% of all marital assets. I looked up, stunned. I stared at the highlighted text, the heavy legal jargon suddenly reading like poetry. 100%. If Mark was trying to leave me with nothing, his own greed had just handed me the keys to everything. We have to prove it, though, Eleanor cautioned, her voice pulling me back to the present. A suspicion isn't enough for a judge, Elena. We need concrete documentation that he moved those funds with the intent to hide them. Account numbers, routing details, international wire receipts. Can you get back into his home office without arousing suspicion? I nodded slowly, the fear in my stomach morphing into a cold, hardened resolve. He plays golf every Saturday morning with his business partners. He leaves at 7 and never returns before noon. I'll have 5 hours. Good, Eleanor said, handing me a small, encrypted flash drive. Copy everything you can find. Tax returns, bank statements, emails regarding investments. Do not confront him. Do not change your behavior. You need to be the most loving, oblivious wife on the planet until we have an airtight case. Leaving Eleanor's office, the afternoon sun felt strangely harsh. My entire reality had shifted in a matter of 24 hours. I was no longer a partner in a loving marriage. I was an investigator trying to dismantle a fraud. Walking to my car, I practiced my smile in the reflection of the window. It looked brittle, a fragile porcelain mask that could shatter at the slightest touch. But it had to hold. I had to go home, look into the eyes of the man systematically destroying my life, and tell him that I loved him. Dinner that evening was a masterclass in psychological torture. I had prepared Mark's favorite, roasted chicken with rosemary and garlic. The aroma filled our home, a mocking reminder of the domestic bliss I thought we shared. Mark sat across from me, his eyes glued to his phone, scrolling through emails. "The chicken is great, Elle," he muttered absent-mindedly, not even looking up. "I'm glad you like it," I replied, my voice steady, though my hands gripped my napkin under the table until my knuckles turned white. "How was work? You've been putting in such long hours lately." "Just stressful," he sighed, finally setting the phone face down. He rubbed his temples, putting on a perfect performance of an exhausted, hard-working husband. "The startup needs more capital, and the investors are breathing down my neck. We have to tighten our belts for a while, okay? No big purchases." The sheer audacity of his lie physically knocked the wind out of me. Tighten our belts. He had just drained $80,000 from our joint account into the ether, and he was sitting in our dining room, eating the meal I cooked, asking me to be frugal. A lump of pure, unadulterated grief formed in my throat. I didn't want to play this game. I wanted to scream, to flip the table, to demand why I wasn't enough for him. Instead, I swallowed the pain. I channeled every ounce of energy I had into my performance. "Of course, Mark," I said softly, reaching across the table to gently pat his hand. He flinched slightly at my touch. "Whatever you need. We're a team, right?" "Right," he lied, offering a tight, empty smile. A team. Saturday morning arrived with agonizing slowness. I lay awake in bed, listening to the rhythmic sound of Mark packing his golf clubs. He kissed my forehead while I pretended to sleep, his lips feeling like ice against my skin. The moment I heard his car engine fade down the street, I threw off the covers and sprinted to his study. The clock was ticking. I had until noon. I booted up his desktop computer, only to find the banking portals now locked behind new, complex passwords. He was covering his tracks. Panic fluttered in my chest, but I forced myself to breathe. Mark was arrogant, but he was also a creature of habit. He didn't trust cloud storage for his most sensitive startup documents. He always kept a hard copy or a physical backup. I began tearing the room apart methodically. I checked behind the books on the mahogany shelves, under the heavy Persian rug, and inside the pockets of the winter coats hanging in the closet. Nothing. At 11 o'clock, sweat pooling at the nape of my neck, my eyes landed on a decorative, vintage globe sitting in the corner of the room. It was an anniversary gift from his parents, something he never let the house cleaners touch. I walked over and traced my fingers along the equator line. It felt slightly loose. Applying a bit of pressure, I twisted the northern hemisphere. With a soft click, the top of the globe popped open. Inside, resting on a bed of velvet, was a small black external hard drive and a physical leather-bound notebook. My hands shook as I reached for them. I had found his vault. I rushed back to my own laptop, plugging the hard drive in. A password prompt appeared on the screen. My mind raced. Birthdays? Anniversaries? I tried them all, and all failed. With only 30 minutes left before Mark was due home, I opened the leather-bound notebook. It was a handwritten ledger, pages of numbers, dates, and abbreviated notes. On the very last page, scribbled in the margins, was a string of random letters and numbers. BC 7749. I typed it into the password prompt. Access granted. The folders unspooled before my eyes, revealing a financial labyrinth so complex it made my head spin. I clicked on a folder labeled Personal Capital. Inside were PDF copies of international wire transfers. I cross-referenced the dates with the notebook. Mark hadn't just drained our joint account. He had been siphoning money from our shared stock portfolio for the last 8 months. The destination for every single transfer was a private wealth management firm located in the Cayman Islands. He had set up a shell corporation under his brother's maiden name to hide the assets completely. The total amount wasn't $80,000. It was nearly $500,000. Tears blurred my vision, but I didn't let them fall. The betrayal was so deep, so premeditated, that it extinguished the last remaining embers of my love for him. He hadn't just fallen out of love with me. He had actively plotted my financial ruin so he could start a new life with our money. I plugged Eleanor's flash drive in and hit copy all. Over the next week, a strange, eerie calm settled over our house. It was the heavy, suffocating stillness that always precedes a violent storm. I had delivered the copied hard drive and the photographs of the ledger to Eleanor. She had confirmed everything. Mark's offshore accounts were completely documented, and his violation of the prenuptial agreement was undeniable. I was fully armed, yet I had to continue living in the trenches. Thursday evening, Mark came home earlier than usual. He didn't drop his briefcase in the hallway like he normally did. Instead, he carried it into the living room, his posture rigid, his expression an unreadable mask of solemnity. I was sitting on the sofa, folding laundry, a picture of domestic docility. "Elena," he said, his voice unusually formal. He didn't sit down. He stood by the fireplace, looking down at me with a mixture of pity and detached coldness. "Can you stop what you're doing? We need to talk." My pulse skyrocketed, thrumming a frantic rhythm against my ribs. This was it. The moment I had been dreading and anticipating for 2 agonizing weeks. He was going to pull the trigger. "Of course," I said gently, setting a neatly folded towel into the laundry basket. I looked up at him, keeping my eyes wide and innocent. "What's wrong, Mark? You look so serious." He took a deep breath, the classic exhalation of a man about to deliver a rehearsed speech. "There's no easy way to say this," he began, looking at a spot on the wall just above my head. "I've been doing a lot of thinking about us, about our future, and I don't think we're working out anymore." "Not working out?" I echoed, letting my voice crack perfectly. I forced tears into my eyes, drawing on the very real grief I had processed weeks ago. "Mark, what are you saying? We've been married for 5 years." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out the thick, familiar manila envelope. He placed it gently on the coffee table between us, like a judge handing down a sentence. "I'm filing for divorce, Elena. I've already signed the papers. It's over." I buried my face in my hands, letting out a stifled sob. Through the gaps in my fingers, I watched him. He looked relieved. The coward was actually relieved. "I know this is sudden," he continued, his tone patronizingly soft. "But it's for the best. You know my startup is struggling. We have practically nothing left in our joint accounts. I've taken on so much debt just to keep the lights on at the office. I don't want to drag you down with me into bankruptcy." The sheer magnitude of his lie was breathtaking. He was framing his financial betrayal as an act of noble sacrifice. He wanted me to believe he was ruining me for my own good. "Bankruptcy?" I whispered, looking up with tear-streaked cheeks. "But what about our savings, our forever fund?" Mark sighed, running a hand through his hair, playing the role of the defeated entrepreneur. "It's gone, Elle. I had to use it to pay off the early investors. We have nothing to divide. But because I care about you, I'm willing to give you a lump sum of $5,000 to help you get on your feet if you sign a quick settlement today. $5,000 out of $500,000. $5,000? I stammered, wrapping my arms around myself as if physically cold. "Mark, how am I supposed to start over with that? What about the house?" "The house is a rental, Elena. The lease is up in 2 months anyway," he said, his patience visibly thinning. The facade of the caring husband was slipping, revealing the cold, calculating stranger beneath. "I've drawn up a simple separation agreement. It waives your right to alimony, but it saves us both the expensive lawyer fees. It's the best deal you're going to get, considering our financial ruin." He pushed a pen across the table toward me. He expected me to cry, sign the document in a haze of emotional devastation, and walk away quietly into poverty. I looked at the pen, then at him. "I can't sign this right now," I said, my voice trembling. "I need time, Mark. I need to read it. I'm in shock." He scowled, frustrated that his neat little plan had hit a minor speed bump. "Fine. You have until Monday. I'm going to stay at a hotel for the weekend to give you some space. But Elena, do not drag this out. We don't have the money for a legal battle." He packed a duffel bag, his movements brisk and devoid of any lingering affection. He walked out the front door without looking back, the lock clicking shut with a heavy finality. The moment his car disappeared down the street, my tears instantly dried. The house was empty, but for the first time in months, I didn't feel lonely. I felt powerful. I picked up his pitiful settlement agreement and dropped it straight into the paper shredder. First thing Friday morning, I was sitting in Eleanor's office. The sunlight streaming through the glass walls felt warmer today, illuminating the stacks of legal documents spread across her desk. "He offered me $5,000, I told her, my voice remarkably steady. "And he told me the business was bankrupt." Eleanor let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "5,000. How generous of him." "Well, Elena, it's time to decline his offer." She slid a thick, bound document toward me. It was our official response to his divorce petition, but it was far more than a simple acknowledgement. It was a declaration of war. Attached to it were copies of the Cayman Islands wire transfers, the translated ledger notes, and a formal motion invoking Clause 14, subsection B of our prenuptial agreement. "We are filing this with the court today," Eleanor explained, tapping the motion. "We are asking the judge to freeze all of his domestic assets immediately and to compel the repatriation of the offshore funds. By submitting this, we are legally accusing him of fraudulent concealment." I picked up the pen, Eleanor's heavy silver fountain pen, and signed my name on the dotted line. My signature was bold and deliberate, a stark contrast to the trembling woman Mark thought he had left behind. "What happens now?" I asked, handing the document back to her. "Now," Eleanor smiled, a predatory gleam in her eye, "we let the process server ruin his Friday afternoon. He thought he could outsmart you, Elena." But the arrogance of men who think their wives are blind is usually their greatest downfall. Go home, turn off your phone. The explosion is going to be spectacular. I took Eleanor's advice. I went home, brewed a cup of herbal tea, and turned my phone completely off. I sat by the living room window, watching the neighborhood children ride their bikes, feeling an incredible sense of peace wash over me. The anxiety that had gripped my chest for weeks was gone, replaced by a cool, unyielding resolve. At exactly 4 p.m., I turned my phone back on. It immediately vibrated violently in my hand. 18 missed calls, 24 unread text messages, all from Mark. What the hell is this, Elena? Who is Eleanor Vance? Answer the phone right now. You are making a massive mistake. Before I could set the phone down, his name flashed across the screen again. I took a deep breath, centered myself, and swiped to answer. Elena.
Mark! Bellowed, his voice raw with panic and rage. What did you do? My accounts are frozen. The bank just declined my corporate card. What lies did you feed this lawyer? Hello, Mark, I said, keeping my tone perfectly conversational, as if we were discussing the weather. I see you received my response. You have no idea what you've done, he yelled, the sound of slamming doors echoing in the background. You're destroying my company. You're claiming I hid money? You're delusional. I'm going to sue you for defamation. You can discuss that with Eleanor at the deposition next week, I replied smoothly. And Mark, next time you try to hide $500,000, you shouldn't use your brother's maiden name. It lacks imagination. The line went dead silent. The sound of his frantic breathing was the only thing I could hear. Before he could formulate a response, I hung up. A week later, the stale air of a rented conference room served as the battleground. I sat next to Eleanor, my hands folded neatly on the mahogany table. Across from us sat Mark and his lawyer, a flushed, sweating man named Mr. Davis. Mark looked terrible. The arrogant swagger he had carried for years was gone, replaced by dark circles and a nervous twitch in his jaw. He refused to look me in the eye, staring instead at his legal pad. Let's get this over with, Mr. Davis began condescendingly. My client is a busy man. Your motion to freeze his assets is a baseless harassment tactic, Miss Vance. There are no offshore accounts. The startup has simply experienced severe financial losses. Eleanor didn't flinch. She slowly opened her briefcase and pulled out a single sheet of paper, sliding it across the table. Mr. Davis, do you recognize this string of numbers? Mr. Davis frowned, examining the paper. It appears to be an international routing number. What of it? It belongs to a private wealth management account in the Cayman Islands, Eleanor said, her voice dripping with icy precision. An account that received 8 wire transfers totaling $480,000 from your client's domestic portfolios over the last 8 months. Mark's face drained of all color. He looked like he had seen a ghost. My client has sworn under oath that this money was lost to bad investments, Mr. Davis stammered, looking nervously at Mark. Your client, Eleanor countered, pulling the entire stack of ledger photographs and bank statements from her bag, committed perjury. And more importantly, he triggered Clause 14B of his own prenuptial agreement. He tried to hide the money, Mr. Davis, which means by his own legal contract, all of it now belongs to Elena. The silence in the conference room was absolute, heavy enough to crush bone. Mr. Davis, Mark's attorney, stared at the ledger photographs Eleanor had provided, his face turning an alarming shade of crimson. Lawyers despise being blindsided, but they absolutely loathe being lied to by their own clients. Mark, Mr. Davis said, his voice a low, dangerous hiss. Did you or did you not transfer these funds to the Cayman Islands? Mark stammered, tugging at the collar of his expensive dress shirt as if it were suddenly strangling him. It was a tax strategy, a corporate restructuring maneuver to protect our assets from the startup's liabilities. I wasn't hiding it from Elena. I was protecting us. Protecting us? I echoed,
the sheer audacity of his lie breaking through my stoic facade. You drew up divorce papers 2 weeks before presenting me with a $5,000 settlement, claiming we were completely bankrupt. You told me the money was lost. Eleanor leaned forward, tapping her pen against the mahogany table.
A tax strategy that coincidentally utilizes your brother's maiden name to establish a shell corporation, Mr. Davis. I believe the court will see right through this facade. Your client acted with malicious intent to defraud my client of her equitable share of the marital estate. Mr. Davis closed his file with a sharp, echoing snap. He looked at Mark with pure disgust.
"We need a recess," he muttered, standing up abruptly. "Now." Watching Mark scurry out of the room behind his furious lawyer, I felt a strange sense of detachment. The man I had loved, the man I had built a life with, was entirely gone. In his place was just a desperate, greedy stranger, caught entirely in his own web. 10 minutes into the recess, the door to the conference room opened. Mark walked in alone, looking incredibly small. Mr. Davis had clearly read him the riot act in the hallway. Mark approached my side of the table, his shoulders slumped, attempting to summon the boyish charm that had won my heart 5 years ago. "Elena, please," he whispered, his voice trembling with manufactured emotion. "Can we just talk? Just the two of us, without the lawyers?" I didn't move. "We have nothing to say to each other that can't be documented, Mark." "Don't be like this," he pleaded, resting his hands on the table. "I panicked, okay? The startup was incredibly stressful, and I made a terrible, stupid mistake. But we loved each other. Think about all the good times we had. Think about the house we were going to buy. You can't just take everything from me. It'll ruin me, Elle. Please, drop the motion." I looked up at him, searching his eyes for genuine remorse. There was none. There was only the desperate fear of a man realizing he had backed himself into a corner. "You ruined yourself," I replied, my voice perfectly steady. "You sat at our dining table, ate the food I cooked, and looked me in the eye while lying about our future. You planned to leave me with $5,000 and a broken heart while you lived on a beach with our life savings. Elena, I mourned our marriage weeks ago, Mark." I cut him off, standing up and gathering my purse. "You don't get to invoke our love to save your bank account." "The mistake wasn't yours. The mistake was me ever trusting you. We'll see you in court." The days leading up to the official court hearing were a blur of legal filings and emotional exhaustion. Eleanor called me on a Tuesday morning, her voice brisk and triumphant. "The judge granted our emergency injunction," she announced. "Mark's domestic accounts remain frozen, and an international order has been issued to repatriate the Cayman funds pending the final hearing." "He is completely locked out of the money. How is he surviving?" I asked, a brief, unwanted flash of pity crossing my mind before I quickly extinguished it. "His lawyer dropped him," Eleanor replied bluntly. "Mr. Davis withdrew as counsel, citing irreconcilable differences with his client. Mark is representing himself next week." He maxed out his credit cards trying to keep his startup afloat, and without those hidden funds, his company is likely going to fold by the end of the month. I sat on the sofa in my new small apartment, digesting the information. The financial trap Mark had meticulously designed for me had snapped shut on his own leg. He had been so consumed by his greed, so confident in his superiority, that he never considered the consequences of his own legally binding prenuptial agreement. "He's going to lose everything," I murmured. "He chose to lose everything the moment he decided to steal from his partner," Eleanor reminded me firmly. "Do not feel guilty, Elena. You are simply retrieving what he attempted to steal. He dug this grave with his own arrogance. Next week, we hand him the shovel." I hung up the phone, taking a deep breath of the quiet air in my new living room. For the first time in years, I felt completely safe. The storm wasn't over. The days leading up to the official court hearing were a blur of legal filings and emotional exhaustion.
Eleanor called me on a Tuesday morning, her voice brisk and triumphant. "The judge granted our emergency injunction," she announced. "Mark's domestic accounts remain frozen, and an international order has been issued to repatriate the Cayman funds pending the final hearing."
He is completely locked out of the money. How is he surviving? I asked, a brief, unwanted flash of pity crossing my mind before I quickly extinguished it. "His lawyer dropped him," Eleanor replied bluntly. "Mr. Davis withdrew his counsel, citing irreconcilable differences with his client. Mark is representing himself next week."
He maxed out his credit cards trying to keep his startup afloat, and without those hidden funds, his company is likely going to fold by the end of the month. I sat on the sofa in my new small apartment, digesting the information. The financial trap Mark had meticulously designed for me had snapped shut on his own leg.
He had been so consumed by his greed, so confident in his superiority, that he never considered the consequences of his own legally binding prenuptial agreement. "He's going to lose everything," I murmured. "He chose to lose everything the moment he decided to steal from his partner," Eleanor reminded me firmly. "Do not feel guilty, Elena. You are simply retrieving what he attempted to steal. He dug this grave with his own arrogance. Next week, we hand him the shovel." I hung up the phone, taking a deep breath of the quiet air in my new living room. For the first time in years, I felt completely safe. The storm wasn't over. The courtroom was vast, filled with polished oak and the solemn weight of the law. I sat beside Eleanor at the petitioner's table, wearing a sharp navy suit that made me feel like armor. Across the aisle, Mark sat entirely alone at the respondent's table. He looked hollowed out, his suit slightly wrinkled, the dark circles under his eyes bruised and heavy. Judge Harrison, a stern woman with a reputation for zero tolerance regarding financial deception, reviewed our filings in silence. The only sound in the room was the rustle of paper. "Mr. Sterling?" Judge Harrison finally spoke, her voice echoing sharply. "I have reviewed the financial records, the international wire transfers, and the prenuptial agreement you yourself insisted upon executing prior to this marriage. The evidence of fraudulent concealment is overwhelming." Mark stood up, gripping the edge of his table. "Your Honor, You will speak when spoken to," she reprimanded him, her gaze piercing. "You deliberately attempted to siphon hundreds of thousands of dollars of marital assets into an offshore shell account, intending to leave your spouse destitute upon filing for divorce. It is a textbook example of financial abuse." She looked down at the documents, then over to me, offering a brief nod of acknowledgement before returning her wrath to Mark. "Pursuant to Clause 14, subsection B of your own legally binding contract, you have forfeited your right to equitable distribution," the judge declared, raising her gavel. "I hereby award 100% of all recovered marital assets, including the repatriated offshore funds, to the petitioner, Elena Sterling. You are also responsible for her attorney's fees. Court is adjourned." The gavel slammed down. The sound echoed like a gunshot, signaling the absolute end of Mark's reign and the beginning of my freedom. The echo of the judge's gavel felt like a physical weight lifting off my shoulders. Eleanor closed her briefcase with a satisfied snap, turning to me with a warm, genuine smile. We walked out of the heavy oak doors of the courtroom and into the brightly lit marble hallway. For the first time in months, I could take a full, deep breath without my lungs burning. "You did it, Elena," Eleanor said, placing a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "The transfer orders will be executed by the banks within 48 hours. You are officially free." Before I could thank her, the courtroom doors opened again. Mark stepped out, looking like a hollowed-out shell of the man I had married. His shoulders were slumped, and his usually perfectly styled hair was disheveled. He slowly walked toward me, stopping a few feet away. Eleanor took a protective step forward, but I raised my hand. I wasn't afraid of him anymore. "Elena?" he said,
his voice raspy and devoid of its usual arrogance. "My company, the creditors are calling in the loans tomorrow. If I don't have capital, I lose the business. I lose everything."
He was looking at me with the eyes of a desperate beggar, silently asking for a handout from the very funds he had tried to steal. "I'm sorry to hear that, Mark," I replied, my voice completely devoid of malice, but equally devoid of sympathy. "I truly am. But your business is no longer my concern. You made sure of that when you signed those divorce papers." I turned my back on him and walked down the long corridor toward the exit. I didn't look over my shoulder. I didn't need to see his ruin to validate my victory. My peace was validation enough. 2 days later, I sat at the small kitchen island in my new apartment, a cup of green tea steaming next to my laptop. The morning sun filtered through the blinds, casting long golden stripes across the room. My phone buzzed with a notification from Eleanor's office. "Transfers complete. Check your portal." My fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment. I logged into my newly established, entirely independent banking portal. The screen loaded and the numbers materialized before my eyes. Account designation, previous balance, current balance. Shared joint checking, $412.50, $0.00. Closed. Independent Wealth Trust, $0.00, $480,000, $412.50. I stared at the glowing screen, expecting to feel an overwhelming surge of joy. Instead, a quiet, melancholic peace washed over me. This money wasn't a lottery jackpot. It was the physical manifestation of my heartbreak, my sacrificed career, and the years I spent blindly trusting a ghost. It was the price tag Mark had unknowingly placed on my loyalty. I gently closed the laptop. The money secured my future, but it couldn't magically erase the betrayal. True healing wasn't going to come from a bank statement. It was going to come from rebuilding my identity from the ground up. For 5 years, I had been Mark's supportive wife. I had dimmed my own light to make sure his startup shone brightly. I took a sip of my tea, feeling the warmth spread through my chest. The funds in that account meant I would never have to worry about rent or groceries again. But more importantly, they gave me the ultimate luxury, the freedom to figure out who Elena was entirely on her own. The following Monday, I walked into the architectural design firm where I had worked as a junior associate for the past 4 years. I had always taken a back seat, accepting smaller projects so I could rush home to manage Mark's domestic life. Today, I walked straight into the senior partner's office. By the end of the hour, I had handed in my resignation. I wasn't leaving to do nothing. I was leaving to finally build my own dream. Using a fraction of the recovered funds, I leased a beautiful, airy loft space downtown. I was opening my own boutique interior design agency. The fear of failure, which Mark had always subtly weaponized to keep me dependent on his vision, was completely gone. As I painted the walls of my new studio a crisp, inspiring white, I made a mental list of personal vows, a new emotional contract, this time entirely with myself. Never shrink my ambitions to accommodate someone else's fragile ego. Trust my intuition implicitly. If the air feels wrong, investigate the falling bricks. Maintain absolute financial independence, no matter how deeply in love I might fall in the future. Forgive my past self for not seeing the truth sooner. Hiring my first 2 employees felt surreal. I was no longer the woman crying on a hardwood floor over a pile of unsigned divorce papers. I was a founder. I was a boss. The energy I had once poured into saving a dying marriage was now channeled into creating beautiful, structurally sound spaces for other people. I was rebuilding my life, one foundation at a time. 6 months passed. The sting of the divorce had faded into a dull, manageable ache, eventually dissolving into total indifference. My design agency was thriving, fueled by my undivided dedication and a newfound creative fearlessness.
One rainy Tuesday, my assistant placed the Daily Mail on my desk. Mixed in with the fabric swatches and vendor invoices was a simple white envelope. My maiden name was written on the front in handwriting I instantly recognized. It was Mark. I stared at it for a long time. The last I had heard through mutual acquaintances, his startup had officially filed for bankruptcy, and he was working a mid-level sales job in another city. I picked up a silver letter opener and carefully sliced the envelope open. "Elena," the letter began, "I know I have no right to contact you, but I couldn't live with the silence anymore. I lost everything, and I deserved to lose it. The money, the business, none of it matters. The greatest loss was you. I was blinded by greed and pressure, and I destroyed the only real, beautiful thing I had. I am so incredibly sorry. I don't expect your forgiveness, but I needed you to know that I know what I threw away." I read the words twice. There was a time, perhaps a year ago, when this letter would have brought me to my knees. I would have wept, desperate for his validation and remorse. But sitting in my own office, surrounded by the life I had built with my own two hands, I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no vindication, no lingering love, just closure. I folded the letter neatly and dropped it into the paper shredder, listening to the satisfying hum of the blades. Sunday afternoon brought clear skies and a gentle breeze. I bought a large bouquet of white lilies, my mother's absolute favorite, and drove to the quiet cemetery on the outskirts of town. I hadn't visited her grave since the divorce began. I had been too ashamed, feeling like a failure who couldn't even keep her own marriage together. I knelt beside the marble headstone, carefully arranging the lilies. The grass was soft and slightly damp beneath my knees. "Hi, Mom," I whispered, tracing the engraved letters of her name. "I'm sorry it's been so long. A lot has happened." I sat there for an hour, talking to her, just like I used to when she was sitting at our kitchen table. I told her about the hidden accounts, the cruel $5,000 offer, and the terrifying plunge into the legal battle. I told her about my new agency, the loft with the big windows, and how I had finally learned to stand entirely on my own 2 feet. "I felt so stupid, Mom," I confessed, a single tear escaping and rolling down my cheek. "I felt so foolish for believing in him, for trusting that joint account." I closed my eyes, imagining her warm, comforting voice. "You weren't stupid, Elena. You were loving. Never apologize for having a heart that trusts." I took a deep breath, letting the cool breeze dry my cheek. She was right. The betrayal was Mark's moral failure, not mine.
My capacity to love and trust wasn't a weakness. It was a strength that he had simply chosen to exploit. I stood up, brushing the grass from my jeans. I finally looked in the mirror of my own soul and forgave the woman staring back at me. A year after the gavel fell, I finally bought my own house. It wasn't the sprawling, traditional home with the wraparound porch that Mark and I had once talked about. Instead, it was a charming, mid-century modern cottage nestled at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, surrounded by ancient oak trees. It was entirely, unquestionably mine. As an interior designer, creating a home for clients was second nature, but designing my own space was a profoundly vulnerable experience. Every paint color, every piece of furniture, every light fixture was a deliberate choice that reflected my healed spirit. I refused to bring a single item from my past life into this new sanctuary. There was no heavy mahogany, no dark leather, no locked drawers hiding devastating secrets. I filled the space with light. I chose soft linens, vibrant abstract art, and dozens of thriving houseplants that brought life into every corner. The centerpiece of the living room was a massive custom-built bookshelf filled with architecture volumes, poetry, and memoirs of resilient women. On the day I finally unpacked the last box, I stood in the center of my sun-drenched living room. I remembered the suffocating silence of the rental house, the sheer terror of sitting on the floor with the divorce papers, and the cold realization that my forever fund was gone. Now, standing on my own hardwood floors, I realized I didn't need a joint account to build a future.
I was the foundation. This house wasn't just a physical shelter, it was the physical manifestation of my hard-won peace. The transition to my new life wasn't entirely without ghosts. One afternoon, while grabbing a latte at a downtown cafe near my studio, I heard a hesitant voice call my name. I turned around to see Sarah, a woman who had once been my closest friend when Mark and I were married. When the divorce happened, she had quietly slipped away, choosing to stay neutral rather than take a side.
"Elena," she said, nervously shifting her purse, "you look incredible. You really do." "Thank you, Sarah," I replied, offering a polite but guarded smile. "It's been a long time." She looked down at her coffee cup, her face flushing with obvious guilt. "I owe you a massive apology. When Mark first told everyone you two were splitting, he spun this terrible story about how you were trying to ruin him financially. I didn't know about the offshore accounts or the prenuptial clause until much later. I should have called you. I should have been there for you." A year ago, her abandonment had felt like a second betrayal. But standing there now, I realized her absence had actually been a gift. It had forced me to rely entirely on my own strength and on the fierce advocacy of people like Eleanor. "I appreciate your apology, Sarah," I said gently, and I truly meant it. It was a chaotic time, and people naturally protect themselves from the fallout. I forgive you. She smiled, looking relieved, and asked if we could sit down and catch up. "I have to get back to my agency," I told her softly, drawing a firm, healthy boundary. "But I wish you all the best." I walked out of the cafe, leaving the ghosts of my past exactly where they belonged. That evening marked exactly 1 year since the final court hearing. I decided it was a milestone that deserved to be properly celebrated. In my past life, anniversaries and celebrations were always orchestrated around Mark's schedule and preferences. Tonight, the only person I needed to please was myself. I dressed up in a stunning emerald green dress that made me feel powerful and radiant. I made a reservation at the most exclusive French restaurant in the city, a place Mark had always claimed was too pretentious, though I secretly knew he just didn't want to spend the money on an experience that wasn't about his business clients. "Table for one, ma'am?" the maitre d' asked with a polite smile as I walked through the gilded doors. "Yes," I replied confidently. "Table for one." I sat by a large window overlooking the shimmering city skyline. I ordered a glass of expensive champagne, savoring the crisp, bubbling warmth as it slid down my throat. I didn't pull out my phone to scroll through social media, and I didn't feel a single ounce of self-consciousness about dining alone. I simply existed in the beautiful, quiet moment. As I enjoyed my perfectly seared scallops, I raised my glass to the empty chair across from me. I toasted to the agonizing pain that had forced me to wake up. I toasted to Eleanor's brilliant legal mind, but mostly I toasted to Elena, to the woman who had survived the absolute dismantling of her reality and chose to weave the broken threads into a tapestry of pure independence. I was alone, but I had never felt less lonely in my entire life. As my design agency grew, I found myself longing to do more than just beautify luxury lofts and corporate offices. The money I had recovered from the Cayman accounts provided me with incredible financial security, but I knew that true healing required turning my pain into a purpose that served others. I reached out to a local nonprofit organization that ran a transitional housing shelter for women fleeing domestic and financial abuse. Their facility was safe, but it was incredibly sterile, filled with mismatched donated furniture and harsh fluorescent lighting. It didn't feel like a place to heal. It felt like a waiting room for the displaced. I offered my agency services entirely pro bono. For 3 months, my team and I worked tirelessly to transform the shelter. We knocked down restrictive walls,
brought in natural light, and painted the rooms in calming, restorative tones. We sourced beautiful, comfortable furniture that gave the residents a sense of dignity and ownership over their space. On the day of the reveal, I stood in the back of the newly designed communal living room, watching the women walk in. I saw the exhaustion melt from their faces as they sank into the plush sofas. One woman, clutching a toddler to her chest, walked up to me with tears in her eyes and simply whispered, "It feels like a home." My heart swelled with a profound, aching joy. I knew exactly what it felt like to have the rug pulled out from under you, to feel financially trapped and emotionally destitute. Providing these women with a beautiful, dignified space to rebuild their lives was the ultimate closure. My tragedy had finally been transformed into triumph. It is a quiet Sunday morning, and I am sitting on the back patio of my cottage, wrapped in a thick knit blanket. The air is crisp, and the sky is painted in brilliant strokes of lavender and gold as the sun crests over the horizon. My rescue dog, a scruffy terrier named Barnaby, is asleep at my feet, occasionally twitching his paws as he dreams.
I sip my black coffee, reflecting on the sheer scale of the journey. If someone had told me 5 years ago that my marriage would end in a courtroom battle over hidden offshore accounts, I would have called them crazy. If they had told me that devastation would become the greatest catalyst for my personal growth, I would have thought them cruel. But looking back, I wouldn't change a single moment.
The blindfold Mark had carefully tied around my eyes, the illusion of the perfect, sharing husband, had blinded me to my own potential. By forcing me into a corner, he inadvertently handed me the very tools I needed to break down the walls I had built around myself. He tried to leave me with nothing, but in doing so, he gave me everything. I am 32 years old. I am the sole owner of a thriving business. I am financially secure, emotionally grounded, and deeply in love with the quiet, beautiful life I have cultivated. The future is an unwritten script, and for the first time in my life, I am the only one holding the pen. I set my empty coffee mug on the table, take a deep breath of the morning air, and smile. The door to my past is firmly closed and locked. The door to my future is wide open.